Good morning, y'all. What's good? This morning they shared a story on the radio about a little boy in Oak Cliff, which is the hood here in Dallas, who went to school. I think they said it was a little boy, but it was an elementary school. It was a kid. I'm pretty sure it was a little Tyrone. Took a gun to school, elementary school. In Texas, in Dallas, I think elementary school was first through either 4th or 6th grade. I think in Dallas it's through 6th grade. Took a gun to school, and the kids were going in to eat breakfast, which is at 7:15 at this school, and the gun accidentally went off in the book bag. And because this is all before school started, they didn't shut the school down or do a lockdown or anything. School went on, that the conversation came up amongst the DJs about culpability of parents when stuff like this happens. And Dee Dee, who like me grew up fatherless most of her life, she did have a stepdad, I think, at some point in her childhood, but she often talks about what it was like growing up, without her dad, and just, they had these there's different, DJs on there, and there's like this Mexican guy on there, Jay Cruz. He talks about growing up, how he raises his family and just the kind of father he is. And if there was another DJ on there that used to be on there all the time, Michael Sean, he's Puerto Rican, and just growing up with his dad, and Dee Dee would always kind of lament, like, boy, it must be nice. And they'd be like, what? And she'd be like, having a dad, or having dinner at the table with your dad, or knowing your dad, or just, just kind of these things that I'm always saying, right? So, I said that to say this. She said that basically when children commit crimes with guns, if you're under the age of 18 and you commit a crime with a gun, that the parent should be the one held liable, criminally liable, in these cases, and that would create a moral incentive, of course, for people raising their kids better. Now, she, like me, is child-free. I want to know what you guys think about that, because I agree. Now, I know those of you who have kids, or people that have kids, I've heard them say, you can't control your kids, you can't be with them all the time. There were some things that when I was growing up, I was raised, because of my last name and what that meant, just certain things I couldn't do. And I see this a lot in Asian cultures. There's things you can't do to embarrass the family. You have this name, you can't do this kind of behavior to embarrass my family or the family, just certain things I couldn't do. I knew if I did, I would, as mother used to say, ASS is grass and I'm going to be the lawnmower. That's just the way it was when I was growing up. I grew up in the 80s. I was an 80s baby. The 80s raised me, and that went with it. And I feel like as society, continues to modernize and life goes on, we get away from holding parents responsible for raising their kids. We have this kind of autonomous culture where, kids are going to be kids and they're going to do what they're going to do, and it's not the parents' fault. And it's amazing to me when kids do well, when they're gifted and talented at something. Their parents were in the PTA, their parents raised them right, their parents were so involved. Their parents. When they mess up, the parents can't always watch the kids. I raised them right. I don't know what happened. So this kind of thing. Well, the same way that I grew up, and like a lot of Asian kids grow up knowing you just can't do certain things because it's going to embarrass the family or bring shame to the family name or whatever. To me, it should be the same kind of attitude with all kids. If a parent knew that their kid, it's the same way with truancy. The way truancy is, or at least it was when I was going to school, but I think it's still the same way. If a kid misses so many days of school, the parent is legally liable. The parent has to go to court for their kid missing school. And so it should be with guns, especially in a state like Texas. I really think it should be that way over all the United States. But in states that are so gun happy and everybody gets to carry a gun, okay, you're gun happy, everybody gets to carry a gun. I think also if everybody carries a gun or everybody has the right to carry a gun, then the parents should be liable. If your kid goes out and does something with a gun, has a gun and should not have it, takes it to school in the book bag and it accidentally goes off, gets caught with the gun, any of that, then that needs to lie on the parent, because you need to be more responsible with what your kid has access to, who your kid is hanging out with, what your kid is doing, all of that. And I bet you people would be a lot more careful about who they let watch their kids, who they let come into their house, who they let their kids spend the night at, whose house they let their kids spend the night at, who they let come to their house to spend the night at their house, all of that. I think there would be a much tighter rein on kids if the parents knew that if something happened with that kid, that they would be liable, especially when you're dealing with something the way all these school shootings are going, And I know not all the school shootings happen by minors, but I do feel like if that kid is under 18 and something happened, the parents need to be liable. To me, that gives a big incentive to people to raise their kids better, Because right now it's just kind of like people are having kids, birthing kids. In other words, they're having sex recklessly, not using protection, just having kids, not raising them, and society has to raise your kids. And what I mean by society has to raise your kids is you're not raising your kids, that your kids end up in the system. Taxpayers have to pay for your kids when they end up in the system, going to jail or being in foster care or whatever, and then the taxpayer has to pay for that. So either you need to be more careful about your copulating your reproduction of children, or when you have your children, you need to be having them more carefully. And I feel like if parents were held more responsible for their offspring or whoever their caretaker is, another thing unfortunately I see in the Black community a lot is people will have kids all willy-nilly all over the place, know they're too young, know they're not able to take care of these kids, and the grandparents will raise the kid. So the grandparents can't even enjoy their old age because their kids have had kids just recklessly, and so the old people are raising the kids. I cannot tell you guys how many, and I'm sure you see it wherever you live. You go to the grocery store, you go to Walmart, you go to Target, and you will see some woman as old as your mother is, well into her 60s plus, with a child, spending her money on a child because she's raising her kids' kids or somebody else's kids, And there's a part of me that feels like as long as we continue to do that, these kids are going to continue to have kids. My grandmother wanted to raise me when I was born, and my mother wouldn't have it. She was like, absolutely not, I'm going to raise her. That was a rarity though. Most kids, when they're teenagers, and my mom was 18 when she had me, if the parents want to raise them, they hand them over gladly so they can keep living their best life, So that's what I want to know. What do you guys think about the whole, if a child does something, and when I say child, I mean anybody under the age of 18 does something illegal with a gun, and when I say illegal, I mean even having one in their possession. Do you think that the parents should get charged? Now, what I expect to happen is those of you who are parents to say, no, that's not fair. And I expect those of we who are child free to say, yeah, absolutely. Especially anyone who's been affected by, gun violence in schools. Those of you who have been affected by a grandparent, seeing your parent or a grandparent or somebody having to raise someone else's child, a child that did not come from them, And I've seen my own grandmother do this, raise like all of her younger kids. At some point she's raised those 3 kids that she raised. At some point, each one of their kids, like if those kids were not in a relationship with a man that was financially stable, she had to raise their kids. The only time she didn't have to raise their kids is if they were with a man that made money, that took care of the family. Otherwise, my grandmother was raising those kids. And then, my grandmother has 2 sets of kids. The ones that she didn't raise, that my grandfather raised, they took care of their kids, So, what do you guys think about that too in the black community? If the black grandparents basically stopped enabling, do you feel like, in our community, and I don't know about the grandparents today, if they, some of the grandparents I meet today, y'all are in their 30s. They in their 30s and their grandparents. Like, they younger than me and they grandparents. So it's like the kids having kids. But do you feel like it's enabling behavior for grandparents to basically raise their kids' kids if they don't have any? So like we talked about this in a recent video. I said that my mom put the fear of God in me about getting pregnant, before I became an adult, before I became self-sufficient. She made it clear, if I ever came home pregnant, I better find another home, because she wasn't raising any more kids. She raised me, and that's all there was. She wasn't raising nobody else's kids. That's it. That's it. You better raise it yourself. You better figure something out, because she ain't raising no kids. So I was extra careful with the copulation, the condoms, the spermicide, the birth control. I had it all. Like, I was not taking no chances, none at all. And in that sense, it proved well. So now I'm 44 and I'm child free, and it proved well for me. But what do you guys think about that? And I know some of you may have been raised by your grandmother. What if your grandmother had said, no, I'm not going to raise any kids? What do you think your life would have been like? Do you think you would even be here? Would your parents have had you at a later date if they had been forced to then raise you themselves, or give you up for adoption, or forced to grow up faster, And that's what, happened to my mother. When she got pregnant with me, my grandmother was like, oh, you got to get out. You grown now. You got to raise your own kid in your own house. But when my grandmother had that second set of kids that she actually raised their whole life, it was something totally different. They had different rules, because my grandmother was older and, wiser. Or at least she was older, So, what do you guys think about that? Do you feel like holding people responsible for their choices, even when they're young? And when I say their choices, I'm talking about, getting pregnant young and being responsible for raising your child young. Do you feel like that's going to make them be more careful about their reproduction? Or if what I see is kids having kids and the grandparents still spoiling them and still doing for them, and so they just keep having more kids because they haven't really bore the brunt of what it really feels like to be out here struggling, One thing I will say is I feel like society, when you become an adult, when you become, and that's unfortunately what happens a lot of times, is when you become an adult and your parents die, you have no soft place to land. I saw that in my own family when my grandfather died. My grandfather was the soft place to land for all of his kids. If for whatever reason any of his kids became homeless, he had a rule that you could always come home. It didn't matter what the reason was, you could always come home. And that was true. Any of his kids could always come home. Some of them never left home. You know what I mean? But when he passed away and the gravy train was stopped and gone, ain't nobody gonna take care of you the way your parents do. When the gravy train is out of commission, baby, that's when you got to start going up and putting a roof over your own head and putting food on your own table. And and I saw that happen too with my grandmother. It's like, okay, the gravy train is gone, kind of. No, her husband, and he's still alive. I think when he passes away, the gravy train gonna be gone for real. But life will make you grow up when you become an adult for real. When you take care of yourself for real, That's when you're forced to grow up and be self-sufficient, and life does not care about your excuses. If you go out there and commit a crime and do whatever, I can guarantee you it'll be a mitigating circumstance. Whatever happened in your childhood, oh, this happened, that happened, oh, okay, yeah, well, now you're going to have some people to watch you. You didn't have anybody to watch you in childhood. We're going to have some people watch you all the time now. And they're going to sentence you to whatever, whatever fits the crime. So in other words, no one cares about what you went through. You're now an adult. You're now responsible. There's no grandmother to care. There's no soft place to land. You're an adult. You have to, live in society and follow certain rules. You have to deal with the consequences of your actions. And that's life. And what's interesting to me is the sooner we learn that in adulthood, I think the better off you are. So sometimes, people will say of children, oh, they need to learn this now. Part of me feels like, well, until they do something like, until they come home with a baby or they done got a gun charge, they done took a gun to school, something like that. Basically, as long as they're kids and they stay in a kid's place and they ain't out there just acting adultish, I think, treating them like children is fine. And when I say treating them like children, I mean not adultifying them, not telling them they need to be strong. No, what they need is protection and covering and love. You need to protect and love them so that when they get out in the world, they have been loved and protected and knows what that looks like. So they're not looking for it in every, in everything else, and especially in all the wrong places, so to speak. So I don't necessarily believe in, raising them hard so that when they get out in the world, they know what's up. No, I'm not saying that at all, Anyway, I'm at the office. Y'all let me know what y'all think about this, and like, share, subscribe. We'll holler later, okay? Y'all be easy. Bye.